Hawthorn Hollow, a village cradled by ancient woods, shrouded in whispers and secrets. The kind of place that seems to exist outside of time, where the trees grow so thick and old that sunlight barely touches the ground and every path is softened by centuries of fallen leaves. Here, the air is heavy with the scent of moss and earth, and the silence is broken only by the distant call of crows or the rustle of something unseen moving through the undergrowth. Isolated, unreachable once the first frost kissed the earth. The roads in and out would vanish beneath a shroud of mist and ice, as if the village itself was hiding from the world, or perhaps from something within its own borders. Outsiders rarely came, and those who did seldom stayed long enough to see the true face of Hawthorn Hollow. And the leaves, always the leaves, turned a shade of crimson found nowhere else, deeper than blood. They seemed to bleed from the branches, painting the ground in a carpet of red that glowed even in the dimmest light. Some said the colour was a warning, a sign that the village was marked by something ancient and hungry. A silent, unsettling spectacle that painted the village in an ominous glow every autumn. The air would grow thick, almost suffocating, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Shadows stretched longer, and even the bravest villagers hurried home before dusk, locking their doors and whispering prayers to ward off the darkness. The villagers spoke of an old tradition, born of a darkness that clung to Hawthorn Hollow like morning mist. It was a story passed down in hushed voices, told only when the wind howled and the fire burned low. They said the village owed its survival to a pact made long ago, a bargain struck in desperation when the harvests failed and hunger gnawed at every door. Each year, as the last leaves clung to the branches, one house was chosen, marked. No one knew how or why, only that the choice was never questioned. A sign would appear, a crimson handprint on the door, or a trail of red leaves leading to the threshold. The chosen family would wait in dread, knowing what was to come, and from that house one soul would vanish. No struggle, no screams, just a sudden, chilling absence, as if the person had been plucked from the world without a trace. The villagers would avert their eyes, pretending not to notice the empty chair at the table or the silence that settled over the home, just an empty space where someone used to be. The pain was private, the grief unspoken. Life in Hawthorn Hollow demanded silence, demanded acceptance. The village moved on, but the loss lingered in every shadow, every whisper of wind through the crimson leaves. They called it the culling. The villagers accepted it. Some believed it was a curse, others a necessary sacrifice. But all agreed that to question the tradition was to invite disaster, to risk the wrath of whatever ancient force watched over the hollow, a chilling bargain for a season of prosperity, a life for a harvest. Or so the legend went. Each autumn the fields yielded more than enough, the orchards heavy with fruit, as if the land itself was appeased by the offering. But the price was always paid in silence, in sorrow, in the crimson tide that swept through the village year after year. I arrived in Hawthorn Hollow on the eve of autumn, a stranger drawn by the allure of forgotten folklore and whispered tales. The villagers watched me with wary eyes, their faces closed and unreadable. I could feel the weight of their suspicion, the sense that I was an intruder in a place that did not welcome change or curiosity. My skepticism ran deep, a shield against the superstitious ramblings of villagers clinging to ancient fears. I told myself that every legend had a rational explanation, that the stories were nothing more than echoes of a darker past. But as the days grew shorter and the crimson leaves piled higher, I began to sense something beneath the surface, a tension, a waiting. But the crimson tide had already turned. The village was holding its breath, and I realized too late that some stories are not meant to be explained away. Some secrets once uncovered can never be forgotten. At the edge of the village, where the fields gave way to wild, tangled undergrowth, stood the hawthorn tree, gnarled, twisted and ancient beyond memory. Its roots burrowed deep into the earth, as if clutching secrets no living soul could ever unearth. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, never daring to approach after nightfall, for the trees seemed to brood in the mist, a silent sentinel watching over the boundary between the known and the unknown. Its branches, like skeletal fingers, clawed at the sky, reaching ever upward as if yearning for something just out of reach. Legend claimed it was older than the village itself, a silent witness to generations of sacrifice and sorrow. Some said the tree had been there before the first stones of the cottages were laid, before the first plough turned the soil. It had seen the rise and fall of families, the ebb and flow of hope and despair. And on its boughs, amidst the tangle of thorns and withered leaves, hung the last crimson leaf. The villagers called it the heart, for it glowed with a strange inner light pulsing softly in the gloom. It was said to appear only once a year, as autumn surrendered to winter, and its presence marked the beginning of the season of dread. They whispered of the hunger, an ancient entity that resided within the tree, feeding on the life force of the chosen one. The stories varied. Some believed it was a spirit bound to the tree by a forgotten curse, others that the tree itself was alive, sentient and insatiable. But all agreed the hawthorn demanded tribute, and its appetite was never truly sated. The leaf, they said, was its gaze. It watched, it waited, and when it fell the hunger would be sated. The chosen one would be claimed, vanishing without a trace, leaving only whispers and grief behind. The villagers believed the leaf could sense the soul it sought, and that its trembling was the sign of the chosen's final hours. The ritual was simple, yet steeped in chilling dread. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world turned to shadow, the villagers gathered around the hawthorn tree. They came in silence, carrying lanterns and candles, their faces drawn and pale. No one spoke of hope. Only the inevitability of the ritual hung in the air. Their faces, etched with a mixture of fear and grim acceptance, were illuminated by flickering lanterns. Children clung to their mothers, elders muttered prayers, and all eyes were fixed on the crimson leaf. They watched, they waited. For the leaf to fall, for the moment when fate would choose its next victim. I stood among them, a silent observer. My rational mind scoffed at their primitive beliefs, dismissing the ritual as mere superstition. Yet I could not ignore the weight of centuries pressing down on this place, nor the way the villagers' fear seemed to seep into the very soil. I felt like an intruder in a world governed by rules I could not understand. Yet a shiver ran down my spine as I gazed upon the crimson leaf, swaying gently in the windless air. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if aware of my presence, as if it could see into the depths of my soul. In that moment, I understood why the villagers watched and waited, why they feared the fall of the heart. For in the silence beneath the hawthorn, even the most steadfast skeptic could feel the hunger stirring, ancient and eternal, waiting to be fed once more. Days turned into nights, each one colder than the last. The villagers' fear was palpable, a suffocating presence that hung heavy in the air. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously towards the hawthorn tree. I tried to reason with them, to explain away their superstitions with logic and science, but my words fell on deaf ears. They were trapped in their cycle of fear, bound by a tradition they could not or would not break. The leaf remained a crimson beacon against the darkening sky. Each gust of wind that rustled its edges sent a collective shudder through the crowd, but it held fast, as if toying with their terror. I felt a growing unease within myself, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The dreams started then, vivid, disturbing dreams of crimson leaves swirling around me, whispering my name. It was foolish, I told myself. The villagers' fear was contagious, infecting my rational mind. I was an outsider, a visitor. I was not bound by their traditions. But the doubt had taken root. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of decay and the sound of whispers. It was the kind of wind that seemed to seep into your bones, chilling you from the inside out. The trees groaned and bent, their branches scraping against each other like old bones, and the leaves danced in frantic spirals, as if trying to escape some unseen force. Every gust brought with it a strange, almost mournful song, a melody that seemed to echo the sorrow of the dying season. The whispers seemed to emanate from the woods, growing louder with each passing hour. At first they were barely audible, just a faint susurrus beneath the howling wind. But as dusk fell and the shadows lengthened, the voices grew bolder, threading through the trees and curling around the village like a living thing. It was as if the forest itself was trying to speak, to warn, or perhaps to lure. The villagers claimed it was the hunger, stirring. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously at the tree line, as if afraid the wind might carry their words away. Some said it was an ancient spirit awakened by the turning of the leaves. Others believed it was the forest itself, angry and vengeful, demanding a price for the bounty it had given all year. I dismissed it as the wind whistling through the trees, playing tricks on my mind. After all, the mind can conjure all sorts of phantoms when the nights grow long and the world seems to shrink beneath a blanket of fog. I told myself it was nothing more than superstition, the product of too many stories told by firelight. But the whispers persisted, seeping into my waking moments. They haunted the edges of my dreams, twisting familiar faces into strangers and turning every creak of the house into a portent of doom. Even in the safety of my own home, I could not escape the feeling that something was watching, waiting. They seemed to follow me, taunt me with their unintelligible murmurs. Then the disappearances began. It started with small things, missing pets, tools left out overnight vanishing by morning. But soon it was people. The village, already wary, grew tense and silent, as if holding its breath. Old Man Hemlock, who lived at the edge of the woods, was the first to vanish. He was a fixture in the village, known for his stories and his stubborn refusal to leave his cottage, no matter how fierce the storms. His absence was felt immediately, a void that seemed to echo the growing unease. His front door was found ajar, his pipe still warm on the table. The embers in the hearth glowed faintly as if he had only just stepped outside. But he never returned, and no one saw him leave. It was as if the wind itself had reached in and plucked him from his home. But there was no sign of a struggle, no indication of where he might have gone. Everything was in its place, undisturbed, save for the faint trace of cold air that lingered in the rooms. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only questions and fear. The villagers whispered among themselves, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and grim acceptance. Rumours spread like wildfire, each more outlandish than the last, but all tinged with the same underlying dread. No one dared venture near the woods after dark. It was his time, they said. The old ways demanded a sacrifice, and the forest had chosen. Some nodded in solemn agreement, while others looked away, unwilling to meet each other's eyes. The sense of inevitability was suffocating. The leaf had chosen him. It was an old superstition, one I had always dismissed. But now, as I watched the last leaves fall, I couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to it. If the wind really did carry messages, and if the forest really did demand its due. I refused to believe it. I clung to reason, to logic, even as the evidence mounted around me. There had to be another explanation, something that made sense in the daylight. There had to be a logical explanation. I pored over old records, searching for patterns, for clues that might explain the disappearances. But the more I searched, the more elusive the truth became, slipping through my fingers like mist. Perhaps he had wandered into the woods and lost his way. The forest was vast and unforgiving, especially in the deepening cold. It was easy to imagine someone becoming disoriented, swallowed up by the endless trees. Or maybe he had simply decided to leave, to escape the suffocating fear that permeated the village. Sometimes the weight of dread is enough to drive a person to desperate measures, to seek freedom in the unknown rather than face the terror that grows with every whisper. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been sown. It took root in the quiet moments, in the silence between gusts of wind, and grew stronger with every unexplained absence. A seed that grew with each passing day, nourished by the whispers in the wind and the chilling reality of the vanishing villages. The wind no longer sounded like a song, but a warning, a reminder that in this place the line between myth and truth was as thin as a fallen leaf and just as easily swept away.